Those? I've been on two juries. You have to go in. They call your number, and you got to go in and sit. And you're with 100 other people, and and I've done it twice, and both times I got chosen. And I think the only reason they chose me is I talked loud, and everybody else is mumbling this and that. And I talk loud, and both juries I got on. I can't believe it. Luckily they only lasted a few weeks. So this doesn't work though?
No.
Okay. All right, and you got a little bit of my, Paul's telling you a little bit of my history and whatnot. And I was thinking, I actually graduated from high school in Denver from Thomas Jefferson. And I went on and played football at the University of Alabama. I won the Heisman Trophy. I also was on the girls' softball team, and I was a pitcher. And what's the guy's name? That's my joke. I wasn't going to tell that joke, but that's a little bit more of my history. And the representative from New York that embellished his resume. Santos, something like that. I guess it's, as they said, it wasn't going to be very funny. My wife said I shouldn't have done it either, and I didn't really do it very well. But I did go to Thomas Jefferson High School, so I graduated. I went there for high school, and I did. I used to come to the Denver Botanic Gardens back in those days. That'd be in the early '70s, and this whole area got me all excited about horticulture. I mean, going in the big conservatory and looking at the orchids and all the different tropical plants just really set me going. And I was taking a botany class at TJ when I was a senior, and then I went off to CSU and I got an undergrad and a master's in horticulture. Spent most of my time teaching at Front Range Community College up there, but also had a nursery pretty much throughout my whole teaching career. I've had a nursery up in Fort Collins with about 4 or 5 greenhouses where I've grown lots of different things, mainly native plants for our landscapes in Colorado, and conifers. I've always been interested in conifers and kind of got into the dwarf conifer thing. Jerry Morris was very instrumental in getting me into doing the things that he selected out. And so a lot of this stuff that I'll be showing you a little later on was originally brought in from the wild and domesticated, and Jerry Morris was very instrumental in all that. So anyway, I'm going to talk mainly about conifers, and for our landscapes nowadays that are typically smaller. Our landscapes are smaller, and I did a lot of landscape design, a lot of landscape construction over the years, and I've just noticed how the houses got bigger and the landscapes or the lots got smaller. So we have to be kind of careful about what we choose for our landscape nowadays, and so many things. If you really want to have a lot of variety and color and textures and things like that, you got to go for things that are slower growing or more dwarfish if you want to get the variety that most of us, strive for in our landscape. So this is a picture taken of some conifers. They're not all dwarfs, but it just kind of gives you an example of the textures and the different colors and things like that you can get. Conifers don't have flowers that are ornamental or anything like that. They do have pine cones that some people think are ornamental, and they are kind of ornamental when they're smaller and before they open up and fall. But just everyone's a little different. The texture's a little different, and the color. So, you can add a lot of variety into your landscapes with that. This is DBG just out at the rock garden, taken a few years back. So it's a little bit more tight now. I would say the whole rock garden has a lot more things in it, and so it's not so open as this. But I like how this sweeping pine kind of accents the flatness and the starkness of the limestone rocks and things. As far as dwarf conifers, if you were to, the most common dwarf conifer I see out there, and the one that kind of grates me the most, as far as because they're so ubiquitous and they're out there all the time, is the dwarf Alberta blues or the dwarf Alberta spruce, which I got a picture of right there. And the reason they're all out there and they're very common, and that's probably one of the first things people plant in their yards, and they call it a dwarf conifer, is this. And it's probably one of the worst you can buy, because what most of them do is they mutate back to what they want to be, and they want to be just a regular spruce, and it's a white spruce, and this is the lower down stuff is the dwarf foliage, and then what's above is how they revert back to what they want to be, and they just want to be a regular big tree. This was originally selected from a seedling that had juvenile growth up in Canada someplace, and it brought into the trade. And the reason you see so many of them is because they're real easy to reproduce. You can grow them from cuttings, and they'll root from a cutting, and so a lot of the big Lowe's and Home Depot, those nurseries carry this thing. And I used to grow it. I've grown it before from cutting, but it's not that exciting to me. Origins of the dwarf conifers, and there's a lot of different areas that these come into the trade. Individual seedlings. Seems like every nursery that grows conifers from seed, every year, if they're doing thousands of them, they'll select out one or two seedlings that kind of look a little different from the others, and that's one way we sort of get these things. And then the owners will kind of plant that in their yard and kind of look at it for a while, and if it continues growing odd or has some sort of other characteristic that they think is very ornamental, they'll watch it, and then eventually they'll take cuttings of it and reproduce it, and it gets into the trade that way. Juvenile fixations. That's a good example. Is the dwarf Alberta spruce I just showed you. Bud mutations, sports, witches' brooms. Brooms are a big source of dwarf conifers in our trade, and there's a lot of different reasons why a plant will develop like a big volleyball or basketball, or even something up in the upper parts of the canopy. Sometimes they're down low, sometimes they're high, and it could be a disease, it could be an actual mutation, and if it's a good strong mutation that holds, then it has a lot of chances to get into the trade if it's got some sort of other attributes. If it's got good color, if it has a different, pretty good texture, the needles grow a little differently than everything else, then it might get into the trade. Alpine forms or mountain forms, these are just things that are growing kind of at the limits of their geographical spread or their habitat, and some of these that get real high in the mountains, and they might be right on the alpine as opposed to subalpine, and it's a very stressful environment. Sometimes that growth translates back, and you bring it down to normal elevations, and you graft it on a proper rootstock, and sometimes that weirdness or that windswept look carries through, and then we can use it, and it could be get into the trade and become a dwarf conifer that we might use. The cultural variants. This isn't so much what we doesn't really. We don't really use much of this. Upright buds produce upright growth, and horizontal buds produce horizontal growth, and known as topophysis. And yes and no. This whole thing, eventually the horizontal growth will start growing upright. So that doesn't always hold through. I don't know why I put that in there. This is an example of a broom, that big blob right there. And that's a broom in a blue spruce, and it's just across the street from where I live. I live right across the street from an old cemetery in Fort Collins. And I've been watching this thing for 20, 30 years, and it's kind of an unusual broom because it's on the stem of the tree. Most brooms are up higher, and they're off of some usually a lateral growing stem, and they'll just be this bud or this arm of the plant that will come off from the regular branching, and it'll just have just tons of twigs, coming off of that, and it'll just be a big ball, and they just look like big green basketballs or something up in the tree, and that's more typical of a lot of the pine brooms. But this is a spruce that has its broom down lower. I actually took pieces of this. I've grafted this before. Doesn't do much other than it's kind of a little blob that doesn't really have that great a color. So I haven't continued to reproduce it. Close up of the same growth. It's a lot bigger now. It sticks out about 3 feet now, but this was taken, as I say, a few years back. Okay, so the grafting, and the reason we graft these conifers is we can't reproduce them any other way. If we collect seed from that tree I just showed you, and we plant it, most of those seedlings will come out normal, and we won't get anything that will look like what we're trying to find, like that broom. So what we do is we have to take pieces of the broom or pieces of the plant that we want to reproduce, and we have to graft them onto a rootstock. We can't, it won't come true from seed, and we can't put roots on them generally. Some conifers you can put into like a mist bed, and you can put roots on a cutting. But that's like mugo pines. That's why mugo pines are so common in Lowe's and Home Depot. And that's why the one I just showed you, dwarf Alberta spruce, is real common. And there are some spruce that you see nowadays that they can root from cuttings. So those are all plants that have gotten into the trade, and they've been reproduced quickly, and they're cheap, and so that's how they can sell them at those department store. I mean those garden centers. Most all of the conifers that are in the trade that I'm in, you have to graft, and because that's the only way you can reproduce that plant. And so it starts here with a piece of the plant. This is the scion. We call this the scion or the sign wood, and we want to get that piece of wood that we've de-needled. We take the needles off, and we want to expose the tissues of that cutting right there to get it to knit to the rootstock. So first thing we do is we put a cut on both sides of the stem, and this is called a side veneer graft that we're going to do. I like to use just utility knives. They're a lot easier to use than grafting knives. And I'm going to put a cut on it, and I'm going to have a little bit of tissue exposed right there. And basically the three tissues there are phloem, cambium, and xylem. And the phloem is the green stuff. There's a little line of meristematic cells that we call cambium, and that's what produces the phloem. And then it also produces the xylem that's inside. Basically, the xylem's in the middle. That's what makes up the wood. The phloem's on the outside. It's usually very thin, not a whole lot of thickness right there, but that's the living part of the plant, and that's what's pretty much taken all the sugars that are produced up in the leaves and things and moving them all around the tree to feed the root system, so it can pull up water up through the xylem, which is in the middle, up to the plant and produce get the water that the plant needs. So anyway, so we got a cut right there. There's two cuts on that. There's a long cut and a short cut. And then, so my sign wood's all cut. Now I'm going to cut my rootstock. And again, I want to make just a cut that goes gradually into the stem and I don't want it to cut through the stem. I just want to gradually expose the stem of that root system to the graft I'm going to put in there. So you can kind of see I make a cut, not real deep, about 1 inch long. Again, it's exposing the vascular wood. And then I take my sign or my cutting and I put it in the cut that I made, and I line up the wood. You want to make sure the wood's fairly, consistent. If your rootstocks are like maybe a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch wide, your sign or your top should be about the same thickness, so they match up real well. And then we use a rubber band to bind the two together. The only tricky part about this is at the end to try to get the rubber band to bite back on itself. That's what we did in that workshop that we did a couple weeks ago. And then we're all done. We got the rubber band all tied up, and basically that's it. This, if you're any good at this should only take you a couple minutes. If you're not very good, it should take you a little longer. And sometimes you go all the way through the stem of what you're cutting. Sometimes you cut your finger, but practice makes perfect. You do a few hundred of them, and I could hire you maybe. Anyway, so that's usually when you're doing this, you're doing flats at a time, and so there's a flat of blue spruce, and that's probably Montgomery. I used to be real big in Montgomery blue spruce, so those were all Montgomery blue spruces grafted onto seedling rootstocks. The rootstocks are a big deal because if you don't have healthy rootstocks, you're not going to have a successful graft. Usually, I'm shooting for probably 80 to 95% success on my graft. So, and the most important part of a successful graft is having a good, healthy root system along with a good, healthy top or sign material. One of the ways that you can get your rootstocks to put a little bit of root growth out and have a little bit more, you might have a little bit better success, is have a bottom heating system. That's what those tubes are. It's a bottom heating system in a greenhouse that's kept just above freezing. But what you want are the roots slightly warm. You want some activity in the root system, but you don't want the tops being too exposed to heat, because you want to slow down the top. So this is a way that you can successfully grow rootstocks for grafts, and then afterwards, you'd put this back after you've grafted it. You've put it back on in the greenhouse on these heating cables. This is a slide that shows you the time period. It takes a long time for the grafting process to work. Basically, at least for me, I'm putting in 3 to 4 years into the root systems before they're big enough to graft, and then after grafting, it's going to take at least 1 year to 2 years to get a successful plant out of that. So the first one you're seeing there over on the other side, that's a freshly done graft. That would be the next one is year 1. After that graft has time to grow, and you take the top of the root system off, and then there'll be 3, 4, so there's like 4 years right there. That just to get a plant that's only maybe 12 inches tall or something like that, 12 by 12, not even that big. So the reason grafted material is expensive is because it takes a long time to do it, and it takes a lot of labor also, as opposed to all those things, the cheaper mugos and spruce and things like that. They're rooting those things within, it only takes them 1 year. They don't have to worry about a root system. They have no labor into the thing hardly, other than sticking and cutting, and so that makes them a lot less expensive. That's why the Home Depots and the Lowe's carry them. This is a shot of my growing area. Those are all successful grafts. Most of all of them have been growing probably, those are like 3-gallon pots, God, I might have waited 5 or 6 years to get them big enough to sell them. There's some pines right there, same sort of thing. The 1 gallons are easily 3-4 years old. So anyway, takes a long time. Seedlings. So a lot of people that do grafting, like the big boys like Isley's and Monroe. Well, is Monrovia even in business anymore? I don't know. Isley, is Monrovia still in business? Okay. Anyway, the big boys, and when I talk about the big boys, I'm talking about the bigger nurseries. They grow. They don't really grow a whole lot of their own rootstocks. They bring in bare rootstocks and they pot them up, hold them for a year. And the big things is they probably put. They try to have as few rootstocks as possible for their grafting purposes as far as variety goes, because they don't want a whole lot of different things to have to worry about. So they bring in lots of Pinus strobus for their 5-needle grafting. And 5 needles are the limbers, strobus, strobiformis, white pines, but that's a strobus. But anyway, the 5-needle things, they pretty much all graft onto Pinus strobus. They even put bristlecones, which is a 5-needle pine, on Pinus on strobus. But I grow most all my all of my rootstock myself, and what you're seeing there is some bristlecone pines on that side, and on this side are some pinyon pines. But that's like that's about 1-year-old trees, so it's going to take a while for those to get big enough for me to graft onto. Another shot of the same sort of thing. Those are probably all 1-year-old plants that have to be individually potted up before I do any grafting on them. Those are bristlecones, and that's probably a 3-year-old bristlecone. And that's getting close to the size I would like it to graft onto. Those are like 4-year-old bristlecones, and that's what I would graft onto. So I'm looking at the 4 years just before I can start to graft them. And as I say, the longer you leave the cookies in the oven, the more better the chance the cookies are going to burn. And so the longer I have to and I'm not trying to get you into this business or out of this business, but there's a lot. You got to be around to water these things, and care for them. And so it takes a while to get these. You got to suffer before you get these big enough to graft onto. Okay, so this is a shot. And bristlecones were probably the #1 thing I got into as far as growing conifers, because I think the bristlecone, just a plain old bristlecone, is probably the best looking conifer for me. And I tried growing bristlecones in pots for a long time, moving them up from a 1 to a 2 to a 3 to a 4, things like that, and they take forever, and I'd lose quite a few every time. So I went to growing them in the ground and in fabric bags. So what I'm doing here is I'm drilling holes, and then I'm put a 10-inch fabric bag in there, and then I'm going to plant a bristlecone in there, and then I'm going to wait 12 years before I dig it up. It's a great business plan. And so, tons of money to be made. I can remember when I did this, and I thought, this is for my daughter's college education, and it pretty much worked out that way. One college education for about, I don't know how many bristlecones I had to do for that, but there we go. They're on one side of that, on the upper side, that's all last year's planting, and this is this year's planting, and I'm putting them on about 4-foot spacing, I think. And there's my daughter, and I think I said, go get me a beer or something like that. But anyway. So again, just propagation, production right there, putting the bristlecones out. And these are not grafted ones. These are just regular old seedling bristlecones. And another shot of one. That's saleable. And again, it's been in the ground for 12 years. And you can count the whorls. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You know how to count whorls. But so you count them on. You got about 12 right down there by the. And there's probably, you have to add probably 4 in there for the seedling. So I'm looking at 16 years right there. I harvested the last of this batch just this year. So, and I started planting those back in the 90s. There's a bristlecone, one of my favorites. I actually named this one. That one's called Blue Bear. And I named it because it had kind of a bluish tinge to the needles. And it was very thick growing, real dense. So that's Blue Bear. That's Blue Bear also. Growth standards for conifers. This is what we have to kind of abide by as nurserymen. And as you can see, the miniatures, who in the hell grow anything 1 inch or less? I don't know who does those. That's even worse than the bristlecones, you know, 6 inches, 6 years, and try to get, you know, $10. Right? I don't know. You can't get. Anyway, I don't know who grows miniatures. I don't know. I don't know who came up with that one. Dwarfs. Pretty much everything that I grow is called a dwarf, and I like it goes up to 6 inches. But you take 6 inches times, you know, 40 years, and eventually you're going to 20-foot plant right there. So even and you know that's going to outgrow its space anyway. And most all these things will do it also. I mean, anyway, but so dwarfs and then intermediates, 6 to 12. I deal a little bit with that. I grow Southwest White, Pinus strobus, no, Pinus strobiformis, Southwest White, and they'll put on a good 12 inches of growth. So I do grow some of those, but most of the really large stuff I don't grow. Most of the stuff I do are dwarfs, but I can still stay in that 6 inch, you know. So this one I call Tough Love. My wife doesn't like that either. I should listen to her. But and I love this because I used to do a lot of landscaping, deal with people, and you know, draw landscape plans. And every once in a while, I'd come back after 10 years and see what they did. And sometimes I'd see something like this, or and I just can see what they had. They had a little berm out in the front yard, and they had a dwarf Alberta spruce. That was the vertical thing, and then they had to have a horizontal thing. So then they planted a Montgomery blue spruce, which is pretty flat to the ground when they probably bought it. And you had the conical and the lower thing, and then this is what results from the thing. But meaning that you really have to tend your plants, and you got to be kind of and you know as bonsais that you really got to whack things to keep them in shape. So, but this person didn't. But those are two. I mean, the Montgomery's a pretty plant though. Charming Chub. These are con colors. I grow 3 or 4 different types of con colors. Charming Chub was one of my favorites. It was named. I think it was selected out by Jerry Morris, and it was named for Chub Harper, who was a big conifer nut. I don't know if he was into bonsai, but he did a lot of conifer selection. And another shot. These are taken at DBG, and I've grown this one for a number of years. I actually, where was that one? No, not that one. That one. See that one? That was planted at my yard. My rock garden, and that actually became my Christmas tree this year. About 20 years old, it was about 5-6 feet tall, beautiful tree, but that became my Christmas tree because it was too close to that rock, and I have 5 or 6 other ones, and I like, you know, taking things out because it kind of, it's interesting. You'll have this real dense garden that I kind of have, and then you'll go in and take a few things out, and it really changes everything, and then you can reload and plant other things in there. But beautiful foliage, nice, soft, rubbery foliage, lots of buds. Look at all those buds. Oops, look at all those buds right there. That's what we look for dwarf conifers. There are lots of buds. That will tell us that it's going to be real dense and not outgrow its space unless you give it 20 years. There's a shot of Jerry. And that's, as I say, Jerry Morris, and he just passed a couple years ago. And he was very, very instrumental in introducing all sorts of Western conifers into the nursery business. And not only just Western conifers, but Jerry did collecting up in the Midwest. Any place there were trees, and he had some friends, Jerry would go and find brooms and cut pieces off those brooms and send them to his various friends, sent some to me. He kept some himself, and then we would graft these onto suitable rootstocks and then give it a name. He gave all sorts of things names, and then we would get it into the business eventually. Jerry made probably, I'll say, 2,000 introductions of various conifers. And just the ponderosas, I think he made, just in Colorado, I know he did like 200-300 ponderosas. And all these weird names he gave them. And, but he was kind of a conifer nut. Here he is. I know he was a member of your society. Here he is with some bonsai material that he was growing in his greenhouse. And he put it in boxes, and he did a lot of spruce from South Park and things like that. And I know his other big love were bristlecones. He did a lot of bristlecones. He did a lot of digging, a lot of collecting, which, you know, it's kind of a poo-poo thing now, but he did it on private property, I think, and so it's legal there. And he didn't do anything real big. He was just mainly going after weird stuff that probably didn't have all that much value to the landscape, you know, in the wild anyway. Okay, back to LaPorte Avenue Nursery. These are a really good selection of Juniper scopulorum. These are called woodwards, and woodwards are probably the tightest. And that one, you know, my talk is about smaller landscapes. These are the tightest, narrowest junipers that I know of, where they won't get big and fat and lousy and fall down in the snow and things like that. These things tend to set a single top, you know, a single stem up the top, and they've got good blue foliage. And as I say, they're the closest thing to an Italian cypress that we have. Fort Collins Wholesale Nursery does these by the thousands, I think, and other nurseries are doing them also. I've grown them for years. And they stay tight, and they're a great upright juniper for small places. This is a spruce called Corbett, and the only reason I'm really showing this, there's Corbett also. There used to be a magazine that the Nursery Association would put out, and it had all the plant materials that we thought were worthy of landscapes in Colorado. And so it was a freebie. We used to, working at Fort Collins Nursery where I used to work when I was younger, we'd hand these they're a pamphlet, and they just had all these really good pictures of plants that you could use in your landscape. I mean, they were trees and shrubs and conifers and things like that. Well, on the cover of this magazine that we used to hand out was a Corbett spruce, and it was a nice, beautiful Corbett spruce. And we didn't have Corbett spruce at Fort Collins Nursery. I don't know where you'd find them. So, but people would come in, they want Corbett spruce. Corbett, well, we don't grow Corbett. We don't have Corbett. So I finally found Corbett spruce down at DBG. It's still there. There's a plant out there called Corbett. It's in the rock garden. Found it, took cuttings, grafted it, got them going. Took about 10 years to do it. And by that time, the magazine had dropped the Corbett spruce from the catalog, and it wasn't on the front of the catalog like it used to be. So there's something else there. And so I went to try to sell these Corbetts, but nobody knew it. Nobody knows Corbett spruce. So, which I get, one of the other things I like to talk about horticulture, our industry moves glacially. It's a glacier. I mean, the stuff that we're growing now and selling in nurseries is the same stuff that we grew back when I started back in the 70s, which is just, sometimes I go to a retail nursery and I go, oh yeah, I remember all that stuff. But anyway, and without pictures, it's hard to sell stuff. Anyway, I shouldn't get on that too much. Anyway, Corbett spruce. I stopped growing because I couldn't sell them. Fastigian spruce. I think that's an excellent plant for the smaller landscape. And nowadays, as I look around, not only residential but commercial, everything is straight up. Everything is a narrow plant. I mean, the oaks, they brought in all these narrow oaks, and the fastigian spruce, and there's other types of spruce. This is a blue spruce, but there's others. I think they're a glauca type that are green, but they're straight up and they're real narrow, and I think they're pretty cool. They're pretty beautiful. But so not only have the residential lots shrunk, but the commercial properties, they want everything real narrow strips of everything, and everything's real narrow. But these narrow spruce do pretty well, or fastigian spruce are a good selection. Pretty good color. This is a Jerry selection, marble. You don't see it a whole lot. I've been growing it for a number of years. I like it because it has kind of a turquoise color. It doesn't set a top like Montgomery's will set tops and grow straight up. Globosa, which is just another Montgomery with a different, I love, we got Globosas and we got Montgomerys, and they're both the same thing, but we sell twice as many because one's Globosa and one's Montgomery, same plant. But so if you got a Montgomery or a Globosa, it's the same thing. You can call it either. But marble's a nice one because marble spreads, doesn't set a top. Got a good color also, I think. That's a Jerry selection. Another, just a little bit more light on that one. J. James, very similar to marble. I can't tell the difference, so it might be the same plant. That's a Montgomery, which are awful pretty, but again, that will set a top if you don't take the top out, and it will start growing like a regular spruce. I don't know what that is. Might be another Montgomery. That's at the DBG Botanic Gardens. Beautiful. I love the rocks that they selected for the rock garden out there. That's a weeping spruce. Weeping spruce are pretty useful also if you've got some space and you got something that can crawl down, like a big rock or a wall or something like that. You got to be after them though, because they're not that slow, and they'll encompass your rock, and so you just have a big blob of a blue spruce as opposed to a rock like that picture right there. I got half the rock and half the blue spruce, but if I let that blue spruce alone, it's going to cover that rock completely, and I'm going to lose my visual beauty for it. So I gotta cut that. And you can also see that the top there, it set a top, and it's putting out a good 18 inches of growth. So they're really not that slow. I like this slide or this picture because those are weeping spruce also, and they've just left them alone, but they almost look like animals, wild animals right there. That's at the Morton Botanic Garden in Lisle, Illinois. I think that's a cool slide. Good use of conifers. This is Bungiana, which is another one of my favorites. I would call a Bungiana a semi, maybe a. It's not a big pine. I would say it's called an intermediate pine. And the reason we plant Bungianas, I would say maybe 20, 30 feet tops is what this one's going to get, but that's still pretty big. But it's the bark, the bark that just makes Bungiana so ornamental, and I'm seeing more and more interest in Bungiana, and they seem to be a lot more cold hardy than we thought they were. We used to think they weren't all that cold hardy, but I think they're the one. I've had one in my yard for 20, 30 years, and it's still doing fine over the years.
Your nursery available?
What's that?
Do you have some of these available at your nursery?
Bungianas? Yeah, about this big. Yeah, nothing real big. But yeah, I do Bungiana both by seed and grafting. And again, there's a couple cultivars of Bungiana out there, but mostly it's just straight Bungiana grown from seed. And the reason is because we're after that bark, and seedling ones will look as good as selections usually. That's a type of chalet, which is Cimbra, Pinus cimbra, stone, Swiss stone pine right there. And I've got some nice selections of Swiss stone pine, and I like Swiss stone pine. The one I really like is called Chalet, which is this. Chalet tends to be a lot tighter than the species, and more narrow and great color, dark green. That's not that great of a slide of it, but really it's kind of interesting. People that come to my place and kind of look around at my stuff, they all kind of want a Chalet because it's tight, dark green, and just a beautiful plant. Fairly narrow though too, so that's a Chalet also. They keep that narrow upright growth, so they work in tight places also. Another Chalet. The pinions are kind of smaller growing trees. I mean, pinions tend to get maybe 20, 30 feet at maturity. Some people think they look kind of ratty. They don't have the nice symmetrical look, but I like them because they have more of a Western look. They kind of remind me of the pines that Roy Rogers was riding through as a kid, even though that was on the back stages of Hollywood. I don't know. They probably had pinions there. Yeah. Because pinions grow in California. This is a habit or a bunch of pinions that are growing just north of Fort Collins. It's the farthest north patch of pinion pines that we know of. There's another one kind of in Wyoming, but I'll say this is the most northern one. And the story about these pinions is they think the Indians introduced them to or planted the seeds because there's a gap. I mean, you'll find pinion pines just south of Denver, but then there's a gap from Denver all the way up to Fort Collins and north until you find them again. So there is some documentation. They found a seed pouch or something like that, an old Indian seed pouch that kind of dates with pinion seeds in it, that kind of dates to the time that the first pinions that they estimate started growing in this area called Owl Canyon. But Jerry Morris made a lot of selections of pinions, and he made a lot of the brooms, and he brought these into cultivations. These are a couple right there, both one's called Trinidad, one's called Farmy, and both of them are, I think, make great smaller plants, maybe 2 to 3 feet tall by 2 to 3 feet wide, so they work really well in smaller gardens. Another shot of the same thing. The 64, is that bad? Oh, you got that? Touch the thing. Touch it. I don't know. I don't know what I did. I touched the screen. Anyway, not going to hurt anything. And so the pinions, there's like 2 flavors of pinions that we grow around here. We've got the edulous, which are the natives to Colorado, and then they also go down into New Mexico and a little bit into Utah and a little bit up in Wyoming, but the edulous. And then there's another one called monophylla, or the single needle pinions, and those are mainly native to Nevada, and they're all over those mountains of Nevada. I forget the technical name for the ranges that they call those ranges in Nevada. They're just separated and they just kind of poke up. But very xeric. The monophyllas tend to have 1 needle. That's what they call it, monophylla, and but they do break apart, so it's really got 2 needles. But they tend to have a blue color as opposed to our edulous. Our edulous have the green color. That's more the Farmy and the Trinidad green, and then the monophyllas tend to have a real blue. And what I'm looking for, as far as ornamental type, for the ornamental characteristics, is a good blue monophylla that stays tight there aren't any real dwarfs of monophylla. A few of them, most of them get to be bigger trees, but pretty easy to sell because they have that good light blue color, and they're very xeric, so they fit well in our landscapes here. There's a really good close-up of a monophylla, and I don't know if I put a name on that one, but that's what a lot of them look like that when they're younger. A lot of these things, a lot of these trees, they have a juvenile kind of look, and then they have how do I say, older. When they get older, they tend to lose the color. They don't stay as vibrant blue. They get kind of a dull overcast. I guess juvenile as opposed to an adult. The adulthood, they lose kind of the shiny blue color and get kind of a duller gray color. But that's after 20, 30, 40 years. Juvenile, when a plant's only 40 years, that's still pretty juvenile. Especially these things that are going to live for 300-400 years. And the selection that Jerry made this selection. This is a monophylla. It's called Blue Jazz, and it's probably the #1 plant that I grow. It was a plant select plant, and so been pumping out these for 20 years, and still there's not enough. But I don't do a whole lot. I only do maybe 100, 150 a year. But Blue Jazz has been a really good dwarf that Jerry selected out. Some other things that I grow, and some other things that aware of are the limbers. I do a lot of different types of limber pines. I probably do 5 or 6 different limber pines, and the limbers are mostly brooms that I do, and most of them are Jerry Morris selections. But limber by itself in the landscape tends not to do real well. That's probably the best looking limber you'll ever see, just because they tend to be open, they tend to lose their inner needles, and they don't tend to have what I would consider a good overall look. They kind of look sick. But the dwarfs, they tend to keep their needles on throughout, and they grow real slow, as I said. They're very ornamental. They don't look anything like the seedling ones do. That's another limber called I think Glenmore or something like that. Fastigiate type. Nothing that I really thought. A lot of times you have to one of the problems with what Jerry did is Jerry selected out all these different 1,500, 2,000 different brooms, that he collected, but he never, and he disseminated them to people and things like that, but he didn't live long enough to really see what they're going to look like, and it takes 20 years sometimes to see what a plant's going to look like. So, and you got to plant it out and you got to look at it. And this is one that I planted. This one's called Glenmore. Planted it out, looked at it. Nothing there really that got me too much. So it was a Christmas tree. I guess that was a nice Christmas tree, but so that's one of the things that which is it's either fun or it's a big waste of time unless you got a whole lot of cookies in the oven and you can see what they're going to do. But it takes a long time to evaluate these things to actually see what it's going to look like or what it's going to do in the landscape before you really should be recommending it to people. But that's just the problem that we have growing with what we do. This is a good one. This one's called Sherwood's Dwarf. It's a Mugo. That's a picture at DBG. I've been growing this thing for many, many years. It's one of the Mugos you can't root from cuttings, so you don't see it at garden centers for sale. So, and it's got a lot of characteristics that I like. The clumpy growth, good green color, grows fairly quickly, but it's easily pruned back, so you can keep it in a tight spot. That's a one in cultivation that in my rock garden. And then here's the one that Paul was talking about. This is Mary Ann Heacock, which has got the best story because it's the oldest thing that I grow, and it was the one that was collected by, as Paul said, Mary Ann Heacock. And they collected it just west and north of Fort Collins in an area of Cherokee Park, I think, they said. And I can just see them, in a Jeep driving down the road, oh, there's a weird plant, and close enough to the road that, they don't have to carry it very far. And I'm sure they had a bunch of shovels and got out and dug it out and put in a bucket or probably back in those days, it would have been a bushel basket of, they used to put apples in or something like that. Throw it in the bushel basket and take it home. Marion Heacock planted it in her yard, and she had it in her yard until she had to move to a nursing home. Kelly Grummins, who's a plantsman in Denver, used to have Timberline Gardens. Well, he's probably a member. Is he a member of the club? Or, no? Anyway, he was taking care of Marianne's Heacock's house at the time. It was early in his career when he was doing landscape management. And when she moved, he dug it out from her yard and moved it to his yard. And that's that's a little island planting in his driveway. And it's there today, and that's a good shot of it. You can sort of see it wants to be a bonsai plant from the get-go. It wants to put out multiple branches, a little spreading, and clumpy growth. I mean, it just wants to be a bonsai. It needs a little bit more help, like for the kind of artistic, artistic picture that you guys want to create, but. Boy, you could easily get this thing into the program. There it is when it's a little older. That slide was taken quite a while ago, and I know it's probably tripled in size, maybe doubled. But he has continued to trim it and open it up a little bit more. So, but that's a great plant for bonsai. Marianne Heacock ponderosa pine. There's mine. But that's a while back. Mine looks a lot like Jerry's right now. I mean, like Kelly's. Mine, but that was when I first planted it. So that's what they look like. And then you take out the lower branches a little bit, and then you start, you know how to do it. Just expose the 2 or 3 main branches that you want it to do, that you want it to be on. Interesting. A lot of the dwarfs have foliage that's like quite a bit smaller and not as long as regular plants. Like there's those 2 needle sizes there. The Marianne Heacock is the smaller, and that's just a regular ponderosa pine on the other side. So the needles are about half as long, a little thicker. But that's another thing you look for if you're looking for dwarf plants, or the needles shorter than the regular type of species. Pinus strobiformis, Southwest white. Some we've got some of those in the trade. There are some dwarfs I've been looking at, but that's kind of a tough plant to get in a dwarf form, just because they want to be big trees. They want to have like 18 inches to 2 feet of growth, and to find dwarfs of those is not as easy on some of the other things, but there are some. I grow a few of those, and they seem to take our soils a lot better. This is what you should be putting, or Isley should be putting its white pines on instead of Pinus strobus, which is eastern white, which is not, eastern white does not do very well in our alkaline soils, as any of you probably know that have tried to grow an eastern white pine in your soil along the Front Range. Doesn't like alkaline soils. Strobiformis can take alkaline soils. Strobiformis is a native of southern Colorado, New Mexico, into Arizona. So it's a 10 times better plant than strobus. And strobiformis, just like strobus, that's what that name means. It's like a strobus, but it's a western strobus, or western white pine. Foliage, good bluish foliage, tends to keep its needles on, doesn't get ragged. Cone, has a nice big long cone. That's how you can tell strobiformis from limber. Strobiformis has a cone that's quite a bit longer than limber. Limber is about maybe 3-4 inches at the most. Strobiformis can be 5, 6, 7 inches long. And the needle's different too. There's a strobiformis that Jerry Morris selected out. That's at DBG also. It's called Coronado. And it's still there, and I do Coronado. It tends to be what Jerry would say is a leaner. It's not a real weeper. You know, the typical weeper will come up and just weep over things. This thing comes up and sort of wants to go one way or the other. It doesn't really weep straight. I mean, in a hard weep, it's sort of a soft weep. It's a lean, sort of like a hug. You know, not the full hug, but the what do we do now? We just sort of, you know, grab onto each other and side hug. Side hug. It's a side hugger. Another shot of the same thing. And that's when, you know, I'm so thankful for having a place like DBG to sort of get me excited about plants and conifers and things. But I'm also happy about DBG letting me come in and take cutting. I shouldn't say any of this stuff, but they don't let you do that anymore. But they help me get these things in production, but I give them back stuff too. So that there's a shot. That's an eastern. Oops, that's an eastern white pine, and as I say, that's the big difference. The eastern whites don't like our soil. They don't like anything about Colorado. I don't know why we bring them in here, but you can buy them probably from. It's because the Lowe's and the Home Depots bring them in. But eastern whites, and you could probably grow them in a bonsai and stuff like that. But they don't like to grow in the regular soil. You can create your own soils. The only eastern white that I've really, well, there's a couple. This one's called blue shag, and it's more of a shrub. Doesn't set a top. I've been able to grow a lot of blue shags, and again, it's grafted onto strobiformis or limber, so it does all right in our soils. And this is a plant that sort of got me in. This is a grabber, this tree right here. This was also, I think, at the Morton Arboretum in Lisle, Illinois. And that is just a magnificent weeping white pine. And I mean, it's big, it's just got everything you want. You almost need, you know, a 400-acre estate to appreciate some things, and this is one of those. But that's just a gorgeous plant. And there's my eastern white, my weeping white pine, and but it's grafted onto limber, I think. So it's nice and green and looks all right there. I don't know if it's going to get through this winter. It's not looking all that great, but every year is a little different. Every year things, you know, tend to go out, but that's why you grow it. And I don't know why I put this in here. I shouldn't, but this is my last slide. So all the stuff that I've shown you, you know, it's living. And you know, and it's ornamental. You know, we're not, you know, getting food out of it or anything like that. I mean, some of us grow these things for money, but most of it's for ornamental horticulture. And we're always looking at our gardens in a different way. And sometimes, you know, you'll be stuck in a rut, and you go out and everything's the same, and you don't really like it, but it's there. And sometimes you just gotta get in there and change things. And I didn't really need this one. This is a Montgomery blue spruce. I didn't really need it. There's another one back behind it. Was kind of taking up space. I thought, oh, so you know, take it out. Okay. And what that does is it frees up, you know, some space. And there's 3 or 4 things you can put in there. So even when you're taking stuff out, it's kind of sad, but it's not really, because the next spring you'll be putting stuff in there and having different things to look at and maybe more colorful things to experience. So you might as well bite the bullet and do it. And that's like any landscape. You know, it's good to come in with maybe somebody else with a different eye every once in a while to kind of, you know, evaluate things and get their 2 bits and so you know, that thing doesn't really that doesn't really work there, and so anyway, it's time to refresh that spot, and where that went out, I put 2 or 3 other things in there, and it looks totally different now, and I'm kind of happy to see it happen. So so that's it, I think. That's my talk. So, questions? Yeah, well, okay, get the test.
Awesome, thank you, Kirk.
Well, you're welcome.
Well, Kirk, I'm sorry, I do have a question.
Okay.
In the beginning, you grafted under the rootstock, the spruces under the rootstock. You wrapped them in what you call a rubber band. I don't know where you get that stuff. But there was no...
You can, you know, just the regular fat rubber bands that you can get in office supply. You cut those, and that's almost as big and almost what you need to do grafting, and to buy a rubber band, and I could go on and on about rubber bands, because after you've done a lot of grafting with rubber band, you can tell the difference between one that's like 3/16 and 4/16. And you've been drinking, and then drinking also, you know, that'll put a different slant on things. But you go with like a 5-inch rubber band that's like a 4/16, or what is that? Well, that's 2/8 or something. Well, 3/16 to, but it's just amazing the thinner to the thicker ones and how they feel when you do it and stuff like that. But you could use those. But we get our rubber bands. I get my rubber bands from A.M. Leonard. And you can get them commercially. But what, is that your question? No.
No. That was interesting. The question is, you don't seal them up with anything, though. You just wrap them and then you're done. What do you do about humidity?
For pines are pretty, pines and spruce and all that, they have a very sticky sap, and that sap kind of seals it in. If I was doing oaks, and I can do oaks just like the graft I showed you, I can do oaks, and then I would probably just put 2 rubber bands on it, as opposed, but you can get Teflon tape, that stretchy tape that's kind of plasticky, or you can buy a, there was a, not a tar, but not a wax, it's a, what do they call that? It's a sealer, it was like a gummy sealer that people put on tree wounds and things like that. Yeah, and you.
They don't recommend that anymore.
What's that?
They don't recommend it anymore.
Yeah, not the black stuff, but you can also get the. It's like a latex base, or it's just this gummy stuff that you can put on there, and deciduous stuff they do that with, but because what the pines, what they put out a lot, pines and spruce, lots of resin, and it seals itself up. I've never had any problem with them drying out. And the other thing, if you put them in a greenhouse, that is, you know, most all my grafting takes place in a heated greenhouse, but the greenhouse is just heated so it doesn't go below 32. So it goes right down to 32, and I try to keep it below maybe 80, 70 during the day. I try to keep it as cool as I can, and I'm grafting. The grafting period is probably, for me, it's December, January, and February. That's when I'm grafting all this stuff. You know, when it's dormant.
Thank you.
Josh.
In terms of like compatibility, I was just asking you about like the 5-needle pines versus the 2-needle. I know for a lot of us thinking about.
The closer the better. Like the closer, and basically in the pines we got 2 big groups. We got the 5-needle things and the 2-needle things. The 5-needle things are Pinostrobus, Pinostrobiformis, Limber, any of the 5-needle, usually finer foliage. Wallowickiana is another one. There's quite a few 5-needle things. Actually, the pinions are 5-needle also. Pinions are in the 5-needle group. And then the 2 needles. The 2 needles are Austrian, Ponderosa, Scotch, anything with a, I mean, and even though pinion, you know, and it's kind of confusing because some things put out 3 needles, some things put out 2 needles, but they're really in the 5-needle group. But you got to do a little research to find that out. But the pinions, even though they put out 2 needles or 1 needle, they're a 5-needle group. And so you got to put them on and basically I haven't been able to put pinions on anything other than a pinion. And for the Austrians and other things, I've been able to put ponderosas on Austrians or Scotch, and all the 2 needles tend to do pretty well when you put them on themselves or something close to it. But for some reason, the pinion I've been able to put bristlecone, and I've been able to put Armandi, which is Chinese white pine, and I've been able to put limber, all on pinion rootstocks, and get a plant that's 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, and it looks like it's going to work. That's all bound up pretty well. But I haven't been able to put anything onto a pinion other than a pinion to work. So.
Is there care differences between the 2 needle and 5 needle?
No, it's just after you graft, keep them in a heated, or just the greenhouse doesn't freeze real hard, and try to keep it from getting too cold or too hot or anything like that. But no. Some things are a little trickier, like the larches. I do larches, and larches you have to bring. Larches are especially decidua, the decidua type. You have to bring the root systems in the greenhouse and get them to leaf out, get some foliage there, and then you can take the sign material that's outdoors and graft them on to the larch. But if you try to do a larch that doesn't have any foliage on it when it's dormant, and you try to graft another piece on there that's dormant, nothing happens. So you got to have the green tissue, the larch has to leaf out the root system before you can put the sign or the stock on there. But it wouldn't have needles when you put it on there. It's still got to be fairly dormant. Same thing with oaks. Like if you're going to graft oaks, like bur oak's a really easy one for a root system. If you're going to put something on a bur oak, you bring the bur oaks into the greenhouse, same sort of greenhouse I'm talking about, just so it doesn't freeze, doesn't get too hot. Try to keep it below 70, 80 degrees during the day. You bring the root system in the greenhouse about a month to 6 weeks ahead. This would be any deciduous stuff. Maples I've done this way, oaks. You bring the rootstocks into the greenhouse, get them leafed out. Takes about 6 weeks for them to start their buds to open and get some leaf tissue. Then you would take your sign material, whatever that you have collected, probably like in March or April. You collect it early and you put it in a bag with some wet towels, and you put it in the refrigerator. So it's dormant. So your sign material is dormant in the refrigerator. Your rootstocks are in the greenhouse. Bring those in about this time. So you'd be grafting maybe around April. Get some leaves on there. Put the sign wood. Do a graft just like I showed you. Just a side veneer down low, pretty low on the plant, and wrap it up. You probably want to use maybe some Teflon tape or something like that, because those are deciduous and they're going to dry out a little quicker. They don't have that gummy resin in the sap, and then wrap those up with your rubber band and then a little bit of Teflon or something plasticky to hold the moisture in. And then watch that bud, and as the sign material starts to break, then you start whacking at the root system and whack it down a little bit so it doesn't grow. You want your sign material to grow. You don't want the rootstock to grow. So you want to throw all the energy into those buds that you've grafted on.
And parafilm is a...
Parafilm, that's what you call it. Yeah, yeah. So.
What's the season for collecting grafting from wild, so if you can't get to a plant in winter? Can you graft all year round?
What's that now?
Can you graft all year round?
No, we usually graft, well, in Oregon you can. They can do anything in Oregon. But around here, the grafting time is pretty much when things are dormant. You could probably push it a little bit, but for me it's December to like mid-March. And I like to do everything right around January, February, get it all done. But you could go a few.
Up high, you can go a couple more months out.
Yeah, yeah, I have a lot of people that send me stuff from the hinterlands, and they've gone up to the top of the mountain to get it or whatever. But usually I get them to do it in the winter, or early or late, right around there, winter. Any other question? Go ahead.
Is there a recommended maple rootstock that you could graft,
Maple?
graft like a Japanese maple onto?
Well, Japanese maple would probably Japanese maple. And again, I haven't done a whole lot of maples. The maples that the closer that you can get to the species that you're grafting, the better. The farther off you get, the better the chance it's not gonna work. But again, I don't have a whole lot of experience with Japanese maples. The maples I've grown are granite tatum, which is Wasatch maple. I've done quite a few Wasatch maples, and I've been able to put there's Wasatch maples are, what are they? Pretty closely related to some other, not anyway. I can't remember. But which one?
Aren't they closely related?
Sugar maple. Yeah. Sugar maples. They're closer, and so. But mostly I put Wasatch on Wasatch. I'm looking for color. We're always looking for the great red Wasatch maple and the fall color. So.
Are any of those smaller leaved maple, like in bonsai, the Japanese maple has a small leaf, so it's kind of it's a good cultivar, or it's a good species for that because it's, you know, it looks compact. Do any of the ones you're grafting with, any of the ones you've seen maple wise, have kind of that smaller, more compact growth habit? Or is it usually like the bigger, you know, kind of color that folks are going for?
Yeah, Japanese maples are just gorgeous, and there's not. I mean, Genola, but that's a poor Japanese, you know. But I mean, I'm sure you could find some dwarfs and things like that, but I haven't spent much time with maples, to tell you the truth.
And they don't do crazy things like grow brooms or stuff like that, like the conifers do. So they
You know, I think all the trees do have a witch's broom type growth. I mean, hackberries are very common. They'll throw out a weird looking, and sometimes it's just over the whole tree. That's like a disease. So some of these witch's brooms, and I've said, some of these can be genetic, and it's not a disease. It's just genetically aborted, and it's just this weird looking ball there. And some of them are actual diseases that stink, and you can kind of tell that the foliage turns yellow, and they're not, you know, going to be ornamental whatsoever. So a lot of witch's brooms are just disease growth. So, and you got to kind of know what you're doing, or at least look at it long enough, or bring it into cultivation to see. Sometimes, who knows, maybe we are producing some disease-ridden witch's brooms, but you know, it hasn't expressed itself to me yet.
Any other questions? All right.
Okay, well, back there, sorry.
How do you prevent a really noticeable collar once it's matured between the scion and the root?
Pick your rootstock to be very compatible to your scion or your top. So, and I know what you're talking about, and for me, you know, I'm looking. You know, people are looking up at the trees and stuff when they're walking around. I'm looking down at the bottom. I'm just looking at the crown where they grafted them, and I'm always going, "Oh, that's a good graft. Oh, that's a shitty graft," you know, because you can kind of. And some trees that you see, you know, they'll just have like a stick coming up with this huge bulge of the root system. And I've got a couple of those also. My Larix decidua, I have a larch Larix decidua, and the root system is just this huge bulb, but it's just a little stick coming out of it, the weeper, and that's a poor choice. And I don't really know why that, because they're both decidua. But that's something that, you know, grafters look at quite a bit, and it just takes some experience to know what species are going to do well on the others, and not become so weird. In Europe, it's kind of interesting. You'll be, and I was just over in England, and they do a lot of beeches back there, and beeches are all over the place. And And for some reason, in England, they graft up about 6-7 feet. That's where they put the, and I don't know why. And you got this huge bulge, and then you can see exactly where it was grafted. It's kind of interesting, and it's not that incompatible because the top isn't that much smaller than the root system, but it's noticeable. The problem with that is that when it's opposite, when you have a real thin, weak root system and you got a big bulge coming off of that thing, that's when it's just going to fail. And so we're not so worried about the big bulge at the bottom as long as they're knit and the plant's doing well, because that's kind of underground.
Yeah, I notice a lot in corporate, around corporate buildings, and you see a tree that's been in the ground for like 15 years, and you can see 3-4 inches above the soil where the texture of the bark on the root stock just looks completely different.
Oh yeah, I mean all our ash are grafted. A lot of the oaks are getting grafted now. Lindens are grafted. There's a lot of deciduous stuff that's grafted nowadays that you'll see that, you know, most of the time it's just noticeable if you've got a good eye for it. But yeah. Okay, well, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
That's fantastic. Some thoughts on the maple questions.
In case you're going to determine his thought